What's up, everybody? Peter X's O'Coffer here. Welcome to Three Things in Music for the Month. We're doing March 2024. And so, what I usually do in these once a month is just take three things I've learned when it comes to music or music history or whatever. I mean, it's a music channel. I love my music. So, three things. First, Taylor Swift, and when the Taylor versions, I sort of a correction. So that we're going to start off with that. Then I'm going to talk about Keith Richards and his use of guitar tone, and just how impressive I am. Impressed by his guitar wizardry and stuff. And then number three will be Sly Stone, Sly and the Family Stone, Sly, and his use of the one, because it's eluded me, and I finally have figured out how he incorporates the one. Number one, Taylor Swift. I probably would have been August or September of 2023. When the Eras tour was blowing up, and I discussed the fact that Taylor Swift and Beyonce are basically Prince and Michael Jackson, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. I mean, they're the biggest acts in the world right now. They're the ones that are stacking the money, and that's ultimately the measure of who's on top. And for the first time ever, the two. And it's interesting. Taylor dropped the album Friday, and 3 weeks ago was it? Beyonce dropped her album, so hey, they're keeping up with the Joneses, so to speak. And I've never had a rivalry. Hopefully that won't happen. I doubt that will happen. But anyway, so for her Taylor's versions album, she did actually redo the vocals. I think I may have when I was talking about the what it means to own your masters and the importance of that. But yes, she did redo the vocals. So I can't remember if I got that wrong or not, but I am definitely stating that she did redo the vocals. So it wasn't, and she made a few changes when it comes to the instrumentation, but not many. So, because I was, when I discussed that in one of my other three things, Prince had the same issue. And of course, when he had a fight with Warner Brothers in the early 90s, but of course, digital audio workstations didn't exist back then. So Prince would have had to record all this stuff all over again. And he did do another version of 1999, in the late 90s. But Taylor didn't have to do that. Probably by law, she had to do some alterations, so she just redid the vocals. And, one of my Swiftie friends, played me some of the vocals. She's like, can you tell the difference? She sounds more mature. I'm like, sounds like Taylor Swift to me, but yep. So just setting the record straight there. Number two, Keith Richards and his guitar tone. So I did the 10 most important guitarists in the history of classic rock. And I said important, not best, because I'm not a proficient guitarist. I use loops and various samples via keyboard when it comes to my guitar. So I was, I've always respected, Keith Richards for his setting the tone and the mood, and he's more about that than, being flashy and whatnot. But, I've heard that the Stones had this interesting weaving technique. So, where they, Keith and whoever the other guitarist was would pass off and go back and forth between rhythm and lead, and lead with the Stones is oftentimes really good rhythm guitar, where it's both. But what stood out to me was Street Fighting Man and Jumping Jack Flash, because as I mess around with my Fender Telecaster sometimes I'll get tones. I'm like, well, that's a really crap tone. Nobody would ever use that. And turns out that Street Fighting Man and Jumpy Jack Flash, I mean, Keith was using some of the crap tones I thought were worthless. So, gotta give a dude some credit when I'm like, I don't know what I would do with that. And he's like, let me show you. Hold my beer. Hey. And the other thing that just blew me away was Miss You. Beautiful guitar work on that song. And it's a mixture of classic rock and funk guitar. I mean, the boomers, the Stones fans are boomers, swear up and down this disco. It ain't disco. They don't know the difference between disco and funk. Love both disco and funk. I have a whole channel on funk. But man, I mean, he blends classic rock and funk guitar characteristics, and it's a thing of beauty. I just finished doing the 3 Rolling Stones songs that changed classic rock and music in general, and talked about, I loved his playing during Sympathy for the Devil, but man, that's some beautiful, beautiful playing in Miss You. Number 3, Sly and the Family Stone and the Use of the One. So, I mean, the foundation of funk. Everybody, when I talk about the Mount Rushmore of funk, it's Sly, it's James Brown, and it's P-Funk, George Clinton, and you can put Bootsy up there too. And James had a lot of different ways to do the one. The easiest being the enhanced snare, and then when he was with Bootsy, Bootsy would hit his bass on the first bass, the first bass drum beats, and Bootsy really ran with that in his solo career. I don't know how often, George said Bootsy taught him the one. I haven't delved deeply into P-Funk to see if they've used the second one. I know they used the enhanced snare. Most people, when it comes to one, they use that enhanced snare, and that means, there's just one snare that's louder than everybody else, and it kind of like pulls the song together and gives them, that it's kind of a hack. It gives, the song that extra funky swing. So, and everybody was always like, well, yeah, Sly had the one. And I was like, Sly's drummer, sounds like not even a funk drummer, but, a very good drummer, but he's a very good rock drummer. I'm like, I could never figure out kind of what, how Sly was doing the one. And many James Brown 70s funk hits, I mean, were not on the one. I mean, James, his musicians were so good that, they could get away. I mean, James, I think, used a trombone on the one. He used the guitar chord before on the one, but sometimes James will do some songs where sometimes it's on the one and sometimes it's not, but it's still funky. So I was just like, well, they're saying Sly's on the one. I'm not going to argue with them. But it turns out, that if you go and you listen to the Sly and the Family Stone, everything revolves around Larry Graham's bass. He's considered the first great bassist. He precedes Bootsy. I mean, Sly's first album was 66. The first big album, Dance to the Music, was 67. And hey, Larry's already dropping the funk with that bass. And then Bootsy comes along 69, 70 when he's with James. So Larry is known for his thumping and plucking technique. He developed this technique because he was in a church band, and the church band had no drummer, so he had to recreate the drums, what the drummer would do on the bass. So that's kind of where he developed that technique. I mean, the classic is Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself Again. But what Sly does is, oftentimes, in Sly's music, uh, different band members mirror the bass. So sometimes he wisely, Sly was like, I have an exceptional bass player here, so let me center the band around this bass. So, you know, sometimes the keyboards would play the same notes as the bass. Sometimes the the rhythm guitar, and sometimes the horns would play that, would do that. Um, so that was his version of the one. He had a great bass player, and he's like, well, let me center the band around my great bass player, Larry Graham. The other thing, we talk about beatboxing and hip hop, and usually it's based on the drums, but Sly had his own. I would call it bass boxing. If you listen to Dance to the Music and Milady, he's actually bass boxing and mimicking the bass with his vocals. And so Sly basically said, we're a bass centric, and when your bass player is Larry Graham, you can, take a rock drummer and make it work. I mean, and the drummer for Sly and the Family Stone was a very good drummer. He wasn't your typical funk drummer, though. So in Sly's band, Larry Graham's bass was the unifying aspect of the group. Now, interestingly enough, I talked, when the Beatles and the Stones came up, they had two guitarists, and that's why four channels and stereo came in the being. Because, rather than stacking the guitar, you had two tracks. You had vocals on one track and instrumentation on the other track, and you had everything stacked on top of each other. So everything was at the center when it comes to the audio spectrum of but when you had four tracks, you could swing, the one guitar to the right and one guitar to the left. And so they weren't fighting with each other, and they had their own channels. One of the things, that, when Black Sabbath came along that they quickly did is and Zeppelin did this, not as much as Sabbath, but Zeppelin did it at times, but and this was a staple of heavy rock, hard rock, heavy metal, and it still is, the bass player mimics the rhythm guitar. So because the rhythm guitar, sets the tone and has the crunch and whatever, and to give it some heft, the bass, usually, not all the time, but the bass usually, mirrors, what the rhythm guitar is playing. So it's interesting, Sly was one of the first to do that classic rock kind of borrows on, but, the difference is the bass is central in Sly, whereas the bass, the rhythm guitar is the central feature in hard rock, and the bass supplements the rhythm guitar. So it's interesting, how all that stuff works. So yeah, those are my three things. I'm working on three things for April. It's going to be very, very interesting. Seeing some interesting trends with Spotify. So I'm going to be doing some research for that. We'll probably do my three things a little earlier in the month because, I always do, a month back. But we'll see. But anyway, thanks for coming through. Got 5 albums here on the my YouTube channel connected here. Also, all 5 are on the streaming services. Have 3 singles out this year. The latest one, Sexy Ass Bitch. And towards the end of the year, I'm going to take all my singles and, do an album. So I don't know. I'm ambitious, 7 to 8, maybe more singles, maybe 12, 13, who knows? I have, they're in the queue, and whatever I don't go this year, I'll just, take into 2025. But I will be doing an album towards the end of the year with called, 2024 the singles, because, my I don't want digital clutter on my platforms, being it Apple or Spotify or here on YouTube. So I'm going to have to take all those singles and unify them. But I am having a lot of fun, exploring my visual art side with these covers. So anyway, thanks for coming through. I also have, I write science fiction fantasy, so I have 2 novels and a novella on Amazon. So thanks again, and I will see you next episode.